I'm Will Burcher. I'm an author. When I'm not writing books, I blog about some of the things I care about, including some amazing places that people might not know that much about. Natural places, forgotten places. In April 2016, I discovered one of these spots. It's beautiful. It's in Florida. It's called the Forgotten Coast. It's a stretch of coastline 100 miles wide in the northwest part of the state on the Gulf of Mexico, east of Pensacola and Panama City, an area affectionately known as the Emerald Coast and not so affectionately as the Redneck Riviera. The Forgotten Coast, though, is different from the Emerald Coast and from a lot of the rest of Florida. See, there's a lot less people here, a lot less development, and a whole lot of wildlife. Almost 1 million acres of land here are protected by refuges, national forests, parks. Within a few hours of getting here, I recognized that it was special. The natural world still has a hold on this place. Life here is prodigious. Really, it's everywhere. Birds are on the beaches in droves. They flock in the salt marshes that border the bays. Wetlands are prolific, full of life. Stop and listen for just a few moments, and you can get lost in it. In places like St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, wildlife abounds. Alligators prowl the swamps, and every day, everywhere, there are countless scenes and natural dramas that play out before your eyes. I was watching these birds in a tidal marsh when a vulture flew overhead. Their coordinated, choreographed reaction was beautiful. And as I explored the beaches, the protected forests, the marshes, rivers, and towns here, a question formed in my mind. Could this place really represent something that I've not encountered in the eastern U.S.? A place where the interests of nature and development are actually balanced? I hope so. See, like a lot of people, I value wild places, and I lament how rare they've become. Could something actually work right here in the Forgotten Coast? I met some great people who helped me answer my question. There's this dedicated conservation group, the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Their mission is to identify and protect critical wildlife habitats in the Forgotten Coast and in other parts of Florida. They recently released a film, The Forgotten Coast: Return to Wild Florida. It documents an insane expedition 3 of the group's members undertook, biking, hiking, and kayaking across 1,000 miles from Central Florida to Alabama. I spoke with the corridor's program director, Maddie Southard. She's based in Tampa and St. Petersburg, and as I drove to meet with Maddie, I had a renewed sense of just how different the Forgotten Coast is from other parts of Florida. The Florida of modern cities, white beaches, palm trees, tourists, trophy boats, and plenty of displays of overt wealth. Could you tell us a little bit about the organization?
We are promoting the protection of a pathway through Florida that protects Florida wildlife species, the land and the water that they need for survival. The Florida Wildlife Corridor consists of approximately 15.8 million acres,
Wow.
Spanning from South Florida to North Florida and then west over to Alabama. So spanning the state through the spine and then westward. What we are fighting for are the areas that we call the missing links, the ones that aren't yet considered in conservation status. So it consists of approximately 6 million acres that are not yet considered in conservation status.
So what do you see as the main challenges to this goal that the Florida Wildlife Corridor has? What are the main challenges that are preventing really healthy corridor from existing here in Florida?
The greatest challenges are essentially not being able to protect those missing links. So if areas become developed that are in this existing corridor, we know this corridor exists, we've seen it, our expeditions have shown us that we can traverse it, but if those areas that are not developed yet, but are at risk of become developed, that poses the greatest risk to it essentially being chopped up. And once it's developed, you can't do anything about it there.
Yeah.
Getting people aware and inspiring them to see these places, care about these places, and keep the corridor connected is our greatest opportunity and is our greatest challenge right now as an organization, is getting the word out.
I told Maddie that I was impressed by the origins of the group, the tracked wanderings of a Florida black bear.
Well, you're absolutely right that the Florida black bear, that it was the inspiration for the Florida Wildlife Corridor. It was based on research from a GPS collar tracking a Florida black bear through the state of Florida to see how it traverses. So that literally we're following the track that the bear is showing us the way. So we know that based on the research that's been done, or it inspires care, it inspires love and a connection with the land and the water. So in North Florida, Northwest Florida, it's the same thing. Areas around Tallahassee and Gainesville, those areas are sprawling out to keep up with the demand of people moving here. So it's about developing in the right areas, being more condensed versus sprawling out, and building roads through areas that were once completely void of roadways. And those, there's other things that come into factor, like the natural resources that we're using, our waterways. We went through so many of the springs. We went through the Rainbow River Springs, we went through Crystal River, we went through Homosassa, Chaskawiska. You see that these areas that once had very clean waterways are now being more polluted. Nitrate pollution, you can see that runoff has really overgrown this area. Algae blooms and species like the manatee, which is also one of our big center focus visuals, is in decline because they're areas that they're usually healthy, well-flowing water are now being gumped up by development more and more. The Glades to Gulf expedition, it helped show all the things that are connected within the Florida Wildlife Corridor, in addition to the major species like the Florida black bear and the Florida panther. We highlighted the manatees and the springs. We highlighted the red cockaded woodpecker and the longleaf pine forests. And then we went over to the Gulf Coast and highlighted the health of the oyster industry in Apalachicola. This is an area where there used to be a couple thousand oystermen, and now the industry is down to maybe 100. And that is a direct result of the decline in the oyster industry. So the BP oil spill, the oil never really got to Apalachicola, but what happened was the great fear that it would, a realistic fear considering how massive that spill was, but people went out and over-harvested. And they took, the oyster industry depends on the young oysters that still need to build up. And so they started pulling all the oysters that they could, fearing that the oil would kill them anyways. And what it ended up doing was harming it even farther because the young ones that needed to build up those reserves were gone. So it's been an industry that's been really struggling because of that. And in addition to that, the health of Apalachicola Bay is dependent upon the Apalachicola River, which you may know has been a battle between Georgia and Alabama.
I left my interview with Maddie questioning my thesis. Maddie talked a lot about the threats that much of wild Florida faces, but still, I kept remembering the ubiquitous life of the Forgotten Coast. So much land protected by refuges and parks and national forest. I remember the salt marshes, so many estuaries, so many rivers meeting the sea. There, it had to be different. I drove back up north that day. Maddie mentioned one of the better known places of the Forgotten Coast repeatedly, in many ways embodying so much of it, the town of Apalachicola. The town gets its name from the river it's next to, the Apalachicola, which is Florida's biggest river by volume. It's a historic place, one of the busiest Gulf ports before the Civil War. The French had a consulate office in town for years, and the town is full of cool old Victorian buildings. It still retains a little of that feel, unique to places like the French Quarter in New Orleans, and at times, when the light was right, and I might have heard a rooster crow, I was reminded of Key West, an old Florida town, soul still intact. But the more I learned, the more I saw that Apalachicola isn't a natural paradise. Fishing, shrimping, and oysters are a big part of this place, a big part and on the decline. At one point, just a few years ago, this one little area supplied most of Florida's oysters. And for a seafood-loving state of 20 million people, that's a lot of oysters. They've always been known as the best of the best, too, for connoisseurs of that sort of thing. But over-harvesting has hit populations of sea life hard, and the town's namesake, the river, is in trouble. A few weeks ago, a big environmental advocacy group, American Rivers, named the Apalachicola America's most endangered river. See, its headwaters are north in Georgia, near Atlanta. and the massive growth that that area has seen has sucked the river of a lot of its water. So much of the natural health of the Forgotten Coast is dependent on the mixture of fresh water and salt. Less fresh and things become unbalanced, out of whack. So here, in this charming little town, was the embodiment of my question, my thesis. Was it no longer something special, something wholly different? Was it no longer a place where nature and humanity were balanced? Nope. I was struck. What is it then? What is this place? I walked a little more, thinking, and I realized. Florida's Forgotten Coast is indeed a critically important natural place. It's a relative island of naturalness in a sea of peopled expansion. Its protected lands, its refuges set it apart, and will always limit development. But it's still under threat, as most natural places are, in Florida and throughout the world. Things done hundreds, even thousands of miles away can still affect protected places. We have such power to affect our environment, for ill or for good, and that's the lesson. The special places, the natural places, the few that remain, like the Forgotten Coast, they deserve our continued protection. But so does everything else. So does that suburb in Atlanta, because it's all connected. Everything, everywhere is connected, and it's time we started seeing it that way.